good life advice. All right, feel free to fire away, everyone.
Do you have any words to say about Tartobi?
Yeah, I was deeply saddened to hear of the passing of Tartobi. He was a huge advocate for his people and a huge believer in the power of the education system when we get it right. I had a bit to do with Tartobi, but of course there will be many who would have seen his impact across the country over many, many years of hard work.
Have you spoken to Dr. Sharma yet?
No, I have not.
Were conversations around MP to MP bullying shut down at that secret caucus earlier on?
Firstly, as I've been really clear, that was a meeting that was informal, not a caucus meeting, and very clearly stipulated that it was not to predetermine the outcome of any decisions around the alleged serious misconduct of Gaurav Sharma. It was simply a place for caucus members who had unfortunately seen that in more formal settings their comments were either being shared or misrepresented. So there was a need for there to be a place where people could freely ask questions and talk about simply what might possibly happen in the future.
So there was no shutting down of any conversation?
No, but of course I'm also mindful that on issues like that, that's not necessarily the forum where such issues would be raised. But what I've continually done with our caucus team is remind them that at any time they're free to approach me, our Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, or any senior colleague that they would wish to raise any issues with. Most of the messages I've received have been an endorsement of the firm but fair work of our whips.
Do you or the party know his whereabouts, where he is and whether he's okay?
Look, without disclosing, details that will be private to members of the team, we certainly have made every effort to make sure that there is support there and, of course, to ensure that we're available. But again, that needs to be done on the in keeping with what at this time the space that the member needs.
Something has been speaking with President Zelensky.
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry. With President Zelensky, obviously he's calling on Russian diplomats to be kicked out of the country. Is that something you're considering?
Look, we've been really clear that there's a number of steps that we have available to us in response to the egregious acts of Russia. Those have included, for instance, very strong sanctions against individuals, export control orders, and the role that we can play in providing financial support and physical kit to support the Ukrainian people in their fight to return their territorial integrity. Just this week, we announced another 120 people from the New Zealand Defence Force would be involved in the training of Ukrainian forces. Those are all meaningful things that we can do. You'll notice that New Zealand is not alone. Many of our other like-minded partners have not taken the step of expelling an ambassador, and that's because that usually then is reciprocated. It would mean that our people in Russia would also be expelled, and that removes one avenue where we can provide support for New Zealanders who may be in the region and also continue to keep abreast of issues in the region.
He also wants you to join other world leaders such as Joe Biden and call Putin a war criminal. Is it about time that you kind of join those talks?
We've always been really clear that, of course, we have all seen evidence that it would lend itself towards war crimes, but the appropriate place for that to be declared would be through the International Criminal Court. And this is where we've really put money behind determining and supporting the Ukrainian people and bringing that issue to the fore and seeking justice. We are financially contributing to Ukrainian efforts to bring Russia to account through the International Criminal Court.
And is a visit to Ukraine completely off the cards?
I've never ruled it out, but it's not in our current planning. I can absolutely understand why President Zelensky is keen to see as many leaders and supporters as possible in Ukraine to make sure that people do not forget the war. I can assure him we have not forgotten this war.
The Pukanga boss, Stephen Town, has resigned. Are you concerned by the instability at the mega polytech and that he's been sitting there so long on special leave?
Look, obviously those operational issues that are being worked through there, but we absolutely stand by the commitment we have to create a training and education facility that can see New Zealand through its skill shortages. This was a necessary step, the changes that have been made. We had a number of polytechs in financial distress. Continual money was being continued to pour into what were often institutions that weren't necessarily meeting the skills gaps we had. Now our job is to make sure that we see the new institution through to successfully deliver for regions in New Zealand.
And does it have the leadership it needs to deliver that?
Well, obviously there has been some disruption that you've just mentioned, and clearly that is a huge focus for the organisation now and being worked through. But again, there's not much more for me to say on those issues.
Why won't you have an independent review into what happened with Dr. Sharma?
You would have heard me point out yesterday that a number of the facts here actually are not in dispute. There were performance management issues being raised by staff on more than one occasion in Gaurav Sharma's office. What is being disputed is what the best way possibly to have dealt with those. We stand by making sure that our MPs create a working environment that supports staff, and that's why those interventions were made. What this situation needs is not a declaration but mediation. That is, in any employment situation, the kind of tool that would be used, and that is what we are suggesting and offering.
Do you want him to stand for Labour at the next election?
He's only being suspended from the caucus. That does give him that possibility and that road back. But the caucus has sent a clear message. They want to rebuild trust, and ultimately that will be in the hands of Gaurav Sharma.
When do you expect the results of the employment investigation to Anna Law, and will they be made public?
That is something that is not managed by the party. That is very much an employment process, and that is as it should be.
Are you confident that no other of your MPs are going to be named or brought up to talk about bullying?
Look, here, well, we of course have those remain unsubstantiated. What we do know is that complaints were made about the employment and office environment, and that actually the whole reason we have had this discussion is because there was an intervention made to performance manage the situation so that we rectified that, and that is what a responsible workplace should do. When it comes to wider issues, look, we have 237 staff at any given time working for Labour MPs. From time to time there will be issues. It's all about making sure we resolve them in the way that looks after the people who work for us and improves the employment relationships we have.
Realistically, do you expect Dr. Sharma to be standing for Labour at the next election?
We wouldn't have used a suspension unless we believed that there was a pathway back. Ultimately now, though, a lot of that sits in the hands of Gaurav Sharma and the work that he is willing to do to find his way back into the trust of his colleagues, and that's what we're asking for.
Can you please
Yeah.
comment on the lack of Asian leadership within Te Order, considering that Asian Kiwis have quite low rates of GP enrolments and screening tests?
The first thing I'd say is that I cannot give you a breakdown of the ethnicity of people in different roles in Te Whatu Ora at this stage. What I can tell you, though, is that there are a number of interim positions as Health New Zealand establishes themselves. And so I expect that over time you will continue to see work done by Health New Zealand to ensure that they are providing the best healthcare for all New Zealanders. And then I'll just come to the last two here. Yeah.
We've seen wage growth reach 8.8%. There's still ongoing issues with war and stuff like that. Is the government going to put in any other measures to limit inflation, or will it be left to the Reserve Bank and the OCR?
You've seen that we can play a role in trying to reduce the impacts of the increases in inflation that we've seen, which is happening around the world. We see our role as cushioning that impact on for New Zealanders. And we've done that in several ways. The increase in the family tax credit. You've also seen the cost of living payment, and there are 2 more payments to come through to October, and the reduction in fuel excise. We have said we will continue to monitor what those inflationary impacts are in New Zealand and the impact on families, but we are expecting, according to forecasts, for inflation to ease over the remainder of the year.
Is there there a risk that putting more money into Kiwis' bank accounts and with wage growth, that just embeds inflation?
These are risks, yes, and so that is why we've been very targeted and time limited. The advice we had is that yes, actually in supporting New Zealanders to get through this period, you do run the risk of inflationary impacts. It's why we've been very strong in pointing out that the opposition's proposals would make the situation worse, not better, and particularly prioritises those, for instance, on the highest incomes in New Zealand as well.
Is it acceptable to have children living in cars in New Zealand? That was a big election issue.
No, it's not acceptable for any family or individual to be living in a car, which is why, of course, we've put so much effort into having built now over 10,000 public housing spaces. We've quadrupled the number of transitional homes. We've built more public houses than any government since the 1970s. But what you're seeing in the data is that we still have people who are coming to the government to seek housing support, who are listing that at the time they come to us, they have unstable housing. It's then our job to get them into permanent housing.
Because on the face of it, the numbers are worse.
Oh, well, again, that unfortunately, we did not have in 2017 an accurate picture of the number of people who were living in crisis. That's because at that time, not everyone could receive the Emergency Housing Special Needs Grant. Not everyone would make it onto a public housing wait list, and not everyone was moving into permanent housing. So yes, we now have a situation where I believe we have a much more accurate picture of the need that exists. That is a point in time though. These are people who are telling us when they first come to see us of their housing situation. We then do what we can to get them into the shelter that New Zealanders would expect. Last question.
Take any responsibility for that record high inflation that we've been referring to, that the Reserve Bank is having to rein in now?
Well, of course, as we've pointed out, New Zealand is not alone. You see the same issues in Australia, the United Kingdom, the United States, even in parts of Asia, you're seeing significant increases in inflation. Unfortunately, the globe is all economically recovering from COVID-19 simultaneously. There are supply chain constraints, and we have the war in Ukraine. New Zealand is better placed than most. We have record levels of low unemployment, and we, of course, have had growth in many of our major exports and the benefit of tourism returning. There is cause for optimism for New Zealand relative to other countries. Thanks, everyone.